Okay, so good morning and welcome everybody. And thank you for our regulars who have been joining us consistently over the years. And for our new persons today, I say welcome to you and thank you for joining us on this lovely Wednesday. My name is Nikelia Gregor-Karai. I am a technical specialist in soil and water with ICA. I am from Dominica, and I am also the coordinator of the Caribbean Climate Responsive Agriculture Forum. And so, welcome. And it is always lovely to have persons from across the region with us. And definitely, when we reach the question and answer and the discussion session, I would encourage persons to, raise your hand, use the mic, let us, discuss with each other. We have our presenter with us today. Let us have that direct communication, that direct discussion today. This session is all about you meeting your needs, meeting your requests. And so we should have a nice session today. And I encourage that we keep that one-on-one, that speaking discussion going. And so with that, just some little protocols before we officially start. To limit some of the disturbances throughout the presentation, as we would want to share the recording with persons, please keep your mic muted. I know sometimes it gets unmuted by error, but please be a little bit mindful so that your mic stays mute. Of course, it's always lovely to see faces, so you can please feel free to share, open up your camera. As I said, the session is being recorded and will be shared with you. For ease of access, we will be uploading it to ICA's YouTube channel, and that I will be sharing with you. You can also access it on the CCRAF's various social medias. For those who have Facebook, those who have LinkedIn, and those who have Twitter, it will be made available there. And so for persons who are new and, just for refreshing the memory of those of us who have continuously participated in those sessions, some of the key objectives of the CCRAF is to help raise awareness and share knowledge as it relates to climate smart agricultural practices, but not just agricultural practice, climate smart practices, but general agricultural practices that can improve the sustainability and improve the incomes along the value chain within the agriculture sector, not only on farm with the farmers. And with that, of course, we are knowledge to action framework. And for us to improve collaboration and building a community of interested and engaged persons with a common goal in mind is also very important for us. And as such, we're looking to build that community, but also promote that enhanced coordination, so we are moving in the direction together in agreement to better improve the sustainability, the climate resilience, and even improving the livelihoods of persons within the sector together. Very important for us also is translating the technical knowledge and the information that is shared through webinars, through various workshops to those actual actions, direct actions on the ground where we can see that direct improvement. And so this is actually a very key area for us that we have been developing and building on over the years. And as you know, these actions will definitely require financial resources, human resources. And so this will take a bit of time to get up to par at the level that you would require and even us would like to. And so it's an action in progress, and we are getting there slowly but surely. But important is having your support for us to reach there together. And so with that today, of course, I'll be the moderator for today. We have our presenter today, Mr. Damian Ajuda. And after that, we'll have an open discussion. And as I mentioned, we'd encourage that you speak out. I know some persons like to write in the chat. Sometimes I tend to miss some of the questions, and I really do not want to miss anybody's question or anybody's comment. So I encourage that you raise your hand during the discussion session, though, so that we can address all the issues and some of the comments and even get some of your own personal experience on the topic at hand. And then we'll have a little wrap up, and I'll give you an idea of the next session's date coming up in September. And so with that, today we have with us Mr. Judah, And he is the Agrosystems Director at New Flower Regenerative Garden in St. Lucia. And he will be touching on quite a bit of important and relevant areas with us today. And that's why I encourage the discussion with him today.
Everything in your hand, you know, to do already.
Oh, we have somebody's.
What I was saying.
Okay. And he will talk to us and delve into various areas as biointensive planting techniques to intensify soil microbiome, regenerative methods to improve soil health and functions, and looking also at the whole agroecological system strategies that can assist in maximizing the utilization of the sun, soil, and water resources, which are very critical in agriculture production. So with that, I will pass on to Mr. Ajuda to share his screen and begin the presentation. And while he is doing that, I am going to share with you a baseline poll to get an idea from you, your knowledge and your skills in terms of implementing nature-based solutions as it relates to water and soil management. So Ajuda, you could go ahead and share your screen.
Hi, good morning. Are you hearing me and are you seeing my screen?
I'm hearing you loud and clear. It would be good to get a bit of confirmation from the other participants.
Yes, I'm hearing.
Loud and clear. Yes, we're hearing.
Okay, great.
Excellent.
And my screen is being shared.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm hearing as well.
Okay, well, everybody, I'm so excited and honored to be part of this movement here today. I won't spend too much time on this slide as most of this has been covered by our brilliant host. So I'm going to begin today. Well, first by introducing where I am. So this is our little family garden, and we demonstrate natural farming, and we are aspiring to be a learning center where forums like this could gather, hopefully as soon as next year, and begin to continue this important journey that we are all on. We need to begin with understanding what nature-based solutions are, and I'm going to
Sorry to disturb you 1 second, Damien. I'm seeing your presenter slide now, not your full screen slide.
Okay, display settings. So if you're seeing my presenter slide, that means that I need to end slideshow.
Yeah, and share the full screen instead. Yeah. So go in full screen. Oh.
Okay, sorry. Share entire screen.
Yeah, and then
okay.
Go full screen.
Okay, slide.
The screen is sharing now on Zoom. So try try that now. Yes, we are good now. Yes, great.
That is it there? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, now but I'm going to change the presenter view. Are you seeing?
Yeah, when you change to presenter view, I'm seeing presenter view. So you have to stay out of presenter view for now.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, good morning.
Okay.
I think part of your challenge might be that you're sharing the entire screen. So what you can do is stop altogether, and then put up when you're going into
this slide.
Yeah. So stop the share altogether.
Stop the share from Zoom. Stop sharing from Zoom.
Okay, so I'm clicking on that multi-participant.
Yeah, just stop sharing.
Oh, it's giving me an option. One participant can share at a time. Okay, stop sharing.
Right.
And share again.
Click share.
Okay.
And instead of sharing the entire screen, can share the application window instead.
Okay.
Share the PowerPoint instead, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's try that. So
okay.
Try from current slide again.
All right, from current slide.
All right, and then try your presenter view so you could see on your end.
Okay, are you just seeing, please tell me you're just seeing my.
Yes,
my
we're seeing just full screen. Thank you, Rishma.
Thank you. You see, that is why we need a village to do these things. Thank you so much for your help. Okay, so let me just first of all begin with my personal assumptions and biases. So from the previous slide, I'm assuming that we can approach nature-based solutions from two basic standpoints. The utilization of elements derived from natural sources to help us with agriculture. And also, this is a mouthful, but agroecological orchestration based on synthesized biomimicry. So I'm hoping by the end of this presentation, first of all, we can all understand that sentence and that we all begin to build some consensus around this central concept. So the assumption, I'm going to present three assumptions that this presentation is founded on. They're not essential to listen to the presentation, but they're essential if we're going to put our full support behind this biomimicry and orchestration concept. So the first assumption is increasing stable soil organic matter, sometimes abbreviated as SUM, is the best way to improve agricultural soil and water management. So I don't think that this is too controversial. So I'm going to move to the second assumption, and of course, we will dig into this a little deeper. Most of the production challenges farmers face are a direct result of loss of soil and the loss of soil quality. Now, you'll hear a focus on the word soil, but of course, once we are talking about soil, we're also talking about the utilization and the movement of water through our systems. This assumption leads to the understanding that protecting the soil surface is of critical importance to soil degradation and erosion prevention. Okay, the third assumption is that agroecologically orchestrated systems can match or even outperform the relevant natural systems they replace. Now, this is the controversial assumption, and I worded it so intentionally because I believe that if we really wrestle with this concept, then we can start to shift our perspective on nature-based solutions and natural farming in general. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the system that I encountered here on my farm 20 years ago was kind of a bush mixed with grassland, some trees. It was progressing into a forest, but quite slowly. And the claim that I'm making is that by the interventions that we have done, that progression of the soil to even support a mature forest has been sped up. So if we allow ourselves to think that by us inputting our creative energies and our vision to a system, that we can actually outperform what nature would do on that site at the stage where we encountered this. Now, that's not to say that we could outperform a rainforest, a climax rainforest in terms of diversity and the rate that soil organic matter would increase. But very few of us have encountered a climax rainforest, and the situations that we have been dealing with or are dealing with are compromised ecosystems that need healing and repair, even though they might have been beautiful in terms of their full potential. I would hazard a guess that next to none of us encountered an ecosystem like this. So we will circle back to this assumption, but we're going to move forward. Okay. So we need to talk about solutions to increase soil organic matter. Natural systems, of course, increase soil organic matter through plant root systems in symbiotic relationship with the soil microbiome. So this is a critical realization. I mean, I always, through my studies of soil science, there was mention of this, but there was never a focus on this. And I think we can all be very encouraged to know that soil science is changing. And we have finally reached the point where we as scientists and researchers are realizing we don't know very much about the soil. And that this is really the starting point of the amazing research that is coming, that will come. And that from this humble position, there's a magnificent journey ahead of us. So one of the assumptions I made when I began organic farming 20-something years ago here was that if I add a bunch of material on the surface of the soil, I incorporate compost. I tried trench composting where I dug deep ditches and gathered up everything that I could and packed it into trenches and covered it up and planted on it and figured that I would transform the soil in a year or two. But none of it seemed to really work. And not to say that compost didn't allow me to grow plants without chemicals, but I had to come to a realization several years ago that if I'm adding so much compost every year and then turning the soil, which I know volatilizes the organic matter and it's released as carbon dioxide, am I really doing everything that I thought I was doing? And is there a better way? Well, we have learned now conclusively that there is a better way, and it is following nature. It's a nature-based solution. So nature, of course, doesn't cultivate the soil, and nature generally doesn't do hot composting. But what nature does is use the root systems of plants to build soil organic matter. So the underlying theme of this entire presentation is this, and if everyone takes away one thing, it is to continually think about and reaffirm that our focus needs to be on plants, root systems, building soil organic matter for us. And so the strategic moves we make and how we design our systems has to be based around diverse, robust root systems as occupying as much of the soil as possible. Okay, there's other related things, but this is the key central concept. Okay, so how do we increase soil organic matter naturally? Like I just said, more roots in the ground, reduce soil disturbance. Like I mentioned, by oxygenating our soil, we do very good things by causing the microbiome or stimulating the microbiome to break down and cycle through nutrients that are then provided to our plants. This, of course, is great, but the result of this is the loss of organic matter. And so we cannot just do it haphazardly. We have to do it strategically. We have to create areas of soil organic matter accumulation and microbiological sanctuaries. We need to also rethink weed management strategies. Sometimes we need to intervene and improve the soil microbiome. And perhaps most importantly, related to the root systems being the driver of soil organic matter, we have to grow healthier plants. Okay, and we'll dive into each of these in a little more depth. Okay, I pulled up this interesting background picture here. Let me just see if I can point to it. I think this is an AI-generated image when I put up complex, diverse root systems. This is what came up. And I think these are melons or squash that they have representing root systems. I had to include it because it speaks to the central concept that what we see above ground of a plant is not necessarily what's going on below ground. And we need to start selecting species in and around our farms that focus on their root systems and providing root exudates to the soil microbiome or the soil rhizosphere, also known as a rhizobiome, when we are considering our soil interventions. Briefly, I've alluded to exudates. And if we are not familiar that plants budget up to 60%, some plants, like some tubers, into secreting sugars. That's why beets and carrots are sweet, exuding sugars into the soil profile to attract and nurture the beneficial soil microbiome that then present all types of nutrients, micronutrients, water, everything back to the plant that the plant requires. So it is a system, a complicated system. As I mentioned, we're just starting to understand it, but this is going to be the focus, I believe, not only my research, but a lot of research going forward is how we can manipulate, increase, and encourage these systems. Now, what I know for sure is that bio-intensive planting is the best way that we as planters, farm managers, agronomists, agricultural practitioners can encourage ourselves and other farmers to increase soil organic matter. So simply by reducing plant spacing, intercropping, cover cropping, and relay planting, we can drastically change these factors. So a little bit more about bio-intensive planting. It's a word that's been kicked around quite a bit, but this is a practical example of a bio-intensive intercrop that I've been using for many, many years now. So it's hard to distinguish, but this is a cabbage. This is a cabbage. There's a cabbage kind of off the frame here. This is a cabbage here, and this is a cabbage. All of these in between here are Chinese cabbage. Now, the distance from here to here is probably about 3.5 feet. So in conventional planting, there would maybe be 3 or 4 cabbage alone in this frame. But we have 4 or 5 and about 6 Chinese cabbage. This is also a dill plant. Some of them didn't survive. And I also want to point out that I have 1, 2, 3, probably 4, maybe 5 callaloo plants that are weeds in my system. So Jamaican callaloo is something that I allow to go to seed so that the seeds are always present. And anytime I stimulate the soil or add compost or anything that has nitrogen, callaloo just explodes. So I am selecting for my weed species, which is also a crop that I harvest from. It's actually the main crop that I've been harvesting over the last year. It feeds my family, and it is also the support crop for my cover cropping system. So within this frame, we are seeing not only a focal crop, which is the cabbage, but a secondary crop, which I probably actually made more money off of, the Chinese cabbage. Then my foundational species, which is the callaloo. And also it is a form of relay planting my cover crop, because I'm allowing my cover crop to establish from the beginning of my cropping cycle. So there's a lot I just said there, and to really understand that it will require you experimenting with it. What seems second nature to me now, because I've been doing it for over a decade, I've found is intimidating to farmers. And even looking at this bed and seeing these little specks of weeds is unsettling to some farmers. and to see plant leaves touching each other, they think maybe diseases or pests are going to spread or they're competing. But I can assure you that this is not happening with this intercrop. I've done it maybe 30 times, and it has basically always worked. It also has secondary important benefits. For example, aphids and caterpillars, our little cabbage moths, prefer Chinese cabbage a lot more than cabbage. It's softer, it's smellier, and they just seem to always land on the Chinese cabbage instead of the cabbage. So I can protect, this is a form of decoy planting, or there's another name for it that's slipping me, but I can protect my primary crop, which is the cabbage, by putting in these pak choi. Also, since pak choi and cabbage are in the same family, their microbiome, both on their surfaces and their root systems, are very similar. And so a faster establishing plant that is exuding more sugars into the soil faster, the pak choi, will start to nurture the soil microbiome that will, after I remove this, I don't remove the root system, I just cut it off. I even allow little Chinese cabbage or pak choi to grow afterwards, will then migrate across to the cabbage. I've taken a little bit too much time on this slide, but I think that this is a critically important tool that I would encourage all who's listening to, if you're not already doing, fully commit to experimenting with this, because from my experience, this is the fastest way not only to improve your soil health, but to do the important thing, especially if we're convincing farmers, is to do these nature-based solutions that also simultaneously increase profits. Okay, regenerative cultivation methods are a field of study that hasn't been dug into, for lack of a better term, too deeply within the tropical small-scale setting. Most of the work has been done in the temperate, large-scale farming operations. Just as the name regenerative comes up, I recommend that everyone start listening to the Regenerative Agricultural Podcast, hosted by John Kemp. This has been a great tool to me on my early research journey, something that you can play in the background that starts to get you familiar with some of the important terminologies of regenerative farming. We have to figure this out, how to do this within our context. It is very important to figure out how to disturb the soil less. So even if we are not going to go shift directly to no-till, we can start to reduce the amount of tillage. So in the picture we see here, we see areas in the middle of the bed and the sides of the bed where I am not disturbing. So there's areas of non-disturbance on all of my planting beds. Sometimes I rotate the positions, and then we have our cultivated zones. In this picture we see here. Here I've dug planting holes and added compost before transplanting. So this is a form of strip planting, and this is kind of one of the focal points of my research, and I hope to share the results. If we do not have to plow the entire bed and only plow strips, we've already done a lot in preserving the soil microbiome and not disturbing the filament networks that are our fungi species, the mycorrhizal filaments that are moving throughout our soil. Mentioning this, if you have to plow, you have to plow, and plowing and cultivation is a legitimate and important tool that is time tested and proven. So it is not to be dogmatic and think that we can never do these things, but just focusing on minimizing and not just doing it blindly and as a reflex action that every time we start a plant, we're planting a bed, we must plow it. I promise you that you will, if you do side-by-side trials where you do minimal tillage compared to full plowing, you will not see huge differences, and definitely not differences that are justified by the amount of labor and the amount of damage that forking and flipping beds especially does. Okay, so we're moving. We need to create areas for some accumulation and microbial sanctuaries. What is our biggest challenge in especially the Eastern Caribbean, of course, is our topography. This limits us from large-scale agriculture. But there's also advantages, and we need to play to our strengths. And what happens is we have supercharged areas on our farms energistically. And when I say that, I'm speaking of energy in terms of where soil carbon builds up, because that is pure energy from the sun, and also where water, which is also a form of energy within the agricultural context, and arguably most importantly, diversity builds up. So in this area here, we see a little gully perhaps down in there where the nutrients and water that are coming off of this these beds are likely draining this way and accumulating, and we're going to see an explosion of vegetative growth in these areas. We need to use these areas strategically, and this is a focus of agroforestry, agroecology, and permaculture, and needs to be a focus of all farming systems. So I'm going to move past this. Weeds. Weeds are a sticking point, and it is every year I have a revelation about a new weed. I've been fighting with nutgrass for 20 years, and I think I'm finally coming to peace. I don't know what it's called in the other islands, but we're talking about the nut sedge that runs and drops these nuts or rhizomes in the soil. And once they're are persistent. So there are weeds that we need to, of course, remove, but there are some that we need to rethink. Water. In the interest of time, I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to try and talk a little less because I'm starting to cough a little bit. So improving the soil microbiome is sometimes an activity that we need to take into our own hands. Some of you might be familiar with the terms IMOs and EMOs. These are either indigenous or effective microorganisms. I've been recently exploring JADAM, J-A-D-A-M, a book that was given to me as a birthday present, which is a simplified form of Korean natural farming, where the focus is on indigenous microorganisms and how to use these indigenous microorganisms to speed up the decomposition and the extraction of biostimulants and fertilizers from the plants that we grow on our farm. This concept is based on a really elegant concept that what your plant needs is itself. So in other words, the best fertilizer for tomatoes is tomatoes. The best fertilizer for young tomatoes would be pruned tomato shoots. The best fertilizers for fruiting tomatoes might be tomatoes themselves. And attached to this concept is also that the weeds that grow in and around our farm are also likely the most important things that we could extract nutrients from for our farms. So nature, we know now, selects for the species that are required at the time and within the current circumstances. So it is perplexing that weeds that you've never seen before, and a conventional farmer told me this, that when he sprays Gramazone, all of a sudden grasses and weeds that he had never seen or hadn't been fighting just pop up. And this is a very interesting proof that nature does select for what is needed. And things like watergrass, I'm not sure what it's called in the other areas, or nutgrass, are pioneering species that fill the mandatory niche of covering the soil as fast as possible, tying it up and protecting it from exposure. So that is why when we cultivate the soil, we are always going to encounter these highly invasive, very aggressive species that are there to cover the soil up and protect it. And so the more we plow and the more we leave the soil uncovered, the more we will fight these species. So if we cover and plow less, you will see these species fade into the background, and other weed species that are more advanced in the expression of the evolution of your system will start to take up residency. Another quick point to point out is we've always known that it's important to save your own seeds, but we're starting to understand more from a microbiological perspective why this is important. And a lot of the adaptations that plants make to a system is, yeah, it's genetic selection based on environmental stimuli, but those environmental stimuli are not expressed, or I should say are expressed through their interactions with their microbiome. So it is actually the microbiome that we're starting to understand that is influencing the adaptation of seeds and species to their environment. By saving your own seeds, you're saving the microbiome also that is specific to your environment. So we're now also realizing that seeds intake bacteria and fungus from their environment that were growing on their surfaces. And then as they're moved to different locations, inoculate where they've been sowed with the specific microbiome that they need. This is now why I had been buying coated seeds with fungicides, because that's sometimes all that's available. And I've been justifying this, that it's not that serious, and that if I add compost, it will remedy it. But compost doesn't solve everything. And the biology in compost is specific to the composting process and not specific to individual plant species. And so seeds are actually the best vehicle to creating the soil microbiome that's or rhizosphere that is necessary, especially for early plant development. And for those agronomists and practitioners out there, we know that if plants don't get what they need early, we have an uphill battle. We'll speak more on that a couple of slides later on. Okay, so of course, growing healthy plants is the critical focus of all agricultural production, but it is also the critical focus of soil regeneration and building systems that utilize soil and water most efficiently. So a healthy plant with an expansive root system and photosynthetic surface area produces a proportional amount of root exudates. So the bigger and healthier and more expansive our root systems are is directly proportional to the amount that that plant can give back to the soil. And I might not have mentioned it, but more than 50% for sure. Some scientists are saying up to 80% of stable soil organic matter. So that's not transient soil organic matter that is affected by cultivation like compost, but the one that humifies, goes and gets incorporated and intertwined with clay molecules and turns our soil darker. These stable forms of soil organic matter are almost all produced through root exudates. Some of it is through deep root shedding when we cut plants back or kill plants and the roots degrade in the soil. But more of it is produced by the sugars that plants exude into the soil. Now, there's an amazing agricultural hack that many farmers and most farmers in St. Lucia that I know have come across through practice. A lot of farmers will say they're organic, they don't use fertilizers, they just use a little well grow. And I used to laugh at this and shake my head and say, yeah, you're not really organic. But my tune is changing a little bit, because some of these well grow formulations and some of the more organic looking ones are doing something very important. They're incorporating a range of micronutrients. This is something that is of critical importance to all technocrats and regional gatekeepers for the agricultural industry. We need to begin to bring in micronutrient solutions that are able to provide not just the regular ones, but like 20 or 40 of them. And so that farmers can manipulate micronutrient dosings. Even if they're of a chemical origin, the amounts that are being introduced into the ecosystem are minuscule compared to the macronutrients. So they're not going to have the ecological impact that nitrate forms and ammonia forms of nitrogen and potassium, which is also can be very harmful to the soil microbiome when applied in too great an amount and at the wrong times. The micronutrients aren't going to have this dramatic impact or negative impact or polluting effect. So I invite everybody to rethink foliar feeding and liquid fertilization, because this is actually the best hack that conventional agriculture has come up with. Because if we are able to get these micronutrients to the plant at the early and right stage, they are able to develop and exude and produce the auxins and the biostimulants and the enzymes that are going to send out the signals to the soil microbiome to create a rhizobiome, a rhizosphere that is actually then going to be able to feed these nutrients and access these nutrients back to the plant. So by producing them early through the plant, stimulating the system, there is a back-end effect of these systems being able to cycle these nutrients more efficiently from nature. So if we are to stimulate the soil microbiome, we can efficiently do it by stimulating plants, by providing the right micronutrients at the right time. So this is, I believe, the cutting edge of agronomy. And I'm hoping that others are have knowledge to share and guide me, because this is one of the, I think, one of the key things that we need to be researching. Okay, I'm a little behind time, so I might start moving a little faster. Solutions to protect the soil surface naturally. This is the one that not too many people, I think, are going to have to be convinced about. But what I am going to put forward is that living mulches or living canopies should be the primary focus, and not necessarily only relying on brown mulches or covering the soil with dead plant organic matter. The reasons for this, of course, are the beneficial impact of having these root systems. So what we don't see that is happening underground, but also the huge importance of these leaves protecting the soil surface from the impact of raindrops. And also, of course, the direct interaction of sunlight with the soil. and the fact that we're best utilizing space and photosynthetic potential. And that's going to be another theme that I'm going to press on before we end this presentation, is that we have to get past this idea that a clean farm is where you can see lots of spaces and spaced out plants, and you can see all underneath the plants. No, nice clean stone or gravel pathways. No, we need to see green everywhere, in our drains, on our pathways, everywhere, because everywhere where we don't see green is a lost opportunity to build the soil and to increase infiltration capacity, or the ability of water to penetrate directly into the soil and be held in the soil profile. Okay, brown mulches are of course important, and as you can see here, these kale plants definitely benefit from the brown mulches. So I just got a signal saying that I was muted. I'm begging that people were. I'm hoping that people were hearing
Sorry,
me.
Damian, I was trying to mute somebody else and I muted you by mistake.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Everybody's okay. Everything is coming across so far. No technical glitches. Okay. All right. So brown mulches. I'm not going to spend time on this because I will say that from my experience using both plastic mulches and brown mulches, I feel that natural mulches just perform better, especially in the tropics, because of soil heating. I've read literature that counteracts that standpoint, but I would love to hear others' opinion on that. Okay, I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about vetiver. This is something intricate to the research I'm doing. And I'm going to make, again, some bold statements about the vetiver plant. I think it's been misused, and I think the research has been more focused on it as a hill slope erosion control mechanism, which it has an amazing capacity and potential to do that. But in so doing that, I think we've neglected what its most amazing capacity is, and that its ability to regrow when it is cut down to the soil surface. So because when we're using it as a soil erosion measure, we want to keep some of the stubble, what happens is the plants get choked out. They, over time, just begin to run out of energy in their root systems to push the new shoots through the dead stubble. And so the plant gets weaker and weaker and is unable to access sunlight at early enough stages to regenerate properly. When we were using vetiver or couscous to cover all of our houses, all of our ancestors slept under roofs of this grass at some point in time. We cut it at as low as possible. The lower you cut this plant, the faster it regrows, and its speed of regrowth is unbelievable. Sometimes I'm able to cut 6-foot stalks within 3 months, so 4 cuts a year, and I'm talking, 5 to up to 20 pounds of organic matter from each clump, and so we're talking potentially hundreds of pounds of organic matter. A great thing about using vetiver as a mulch, I'll zoom in a little bit right here, is the longest standing material. In other words, it takes the longest to break down out of any mulch material that I've used. And it is rough, and it has little razory bumps, so you have to wear long sleeves and gloves. But these little bumps actually prevent or discourage the movement of slugs and snails. Not to say that they won't do it, but it's not their preferred habitat. So one of the issues that farmers bring up about mulching is that it's going to encourage pest and disease. And I would agree that that's possible, especially if a farmer is converting from an intensive nitrogen-based a chemical farming system where the over-application of nitrogen and other macronutrients cause blooms of diseases, oomycetes and different fungi that are pathogens, that if you then go and mulch it with a natural mulch, you might actually create more problems for yourself. So mulching with these natural, long-standing mulches is something you have to move into gradually, and you have to establish, they should be done in conjunction with composting, and they should also be done in conjunction with the addition of leaf mold from your surrounding forests. So underneath the vetiver you're seeing here, I will first add leaf mold, rotting leaves. The purpose for this is to make sure that I'm introducing enough fungal communities that are able to outcompete the pathogenic fungal communities that could cause problems for you when you're creating this nice, cool, nutrient-rich, wet environment under your permanent mulches. Okay. So love to hear some questions about my experience with vetiver in the questions section of it. Just going to move a little faster. I see I'm already about 10 minutes over time. Relay planting. This is just a quick, this is actually the same area. So after this crop came out, again, I allowed the callaloo. I went in and seeded mucuna bean in some of these higher beds. You're not seeing it. Unfortunately, the time I took the picture wasn't so good. Jack bean, I seeded along this bed. I also use cowpea. So as the crop is maturing, I go in and I just stick seeds in and I'll start selecting for the native weeds and herbs that I want to create my cover crop. So this was taken yesterday or day before. So I'm going to leave this like this. I go through and I take out the water grass in my pathways. And before I close the system up for another 2 months of this wild/controlled fallow, I'm going to remove the water grass, put it in the pathways and mulch the pathways with vetiver, because I want herbal species, forb species, species that have a diversity of root systems and root types to be the majority of what's happening here. I don't want single species to take over and dominate. So I am selecting for diversity when I'm cover cropping. Don't have time to go too much into why. We can talk about that in the questions. But cover cropping with legumes alone is now being called into question. And the overall utility of legumes as the go-to for cover cropping is also being challenged, and a diverse approach is being settled on as the best rule of thumb. Okay, in a previous presentation, I talked about trench composting. I just want to briefly go over this. This is something that I've been doing for years now, and I'm getting a little better at it. Let me see if I can blow this one up too a little bit. So this is a bed. Let me get a pointer. Oh, I can't do both at the same time, sorry. Okay, so if you can see my hand here, this is the edge of a bed. This is the path or the drain in between a bed, about 14 inches. This is the next bed, and this is my bed surface. You can see my permanent or my furrows and my undisturbed spaces here. Okay, and this is material. I try and get rotting wood to put at the base of this, and then I chop up thick things like castor or callaloo stems to kind of prevent compaction here and to allow the movement of water, or if it's the rainy season, the drain to still act like a drain. In this one, I've put a layer of vetiver on top of that. And then this layer is all my weeds that I've collected from the area. Then I put a layer of chicken manure and another layer of vetiver to cap it off. And so now essentially my drain or pathway disappears and is just a vertiver walkway. It becomes spongy and very pleasant to walk on. Let me go forward here. So this is a quick demonstration. This is what the area looked like beforehand. So my path is through here. This is after this callaloo that was here. You can see it here. I chopped up the stems, put them down. Then I cleaned all underneath, pulled the lendus and the watergrass and whatever that was under these dasheen. I cleaned this other bed. So I generally do a trench compost using the material from the two adjacent beds. I pile it up in the middle here. I tuck it in. I take a little time to really stuff it in and fold it under and try and compact it as much as possible. And then here's my leaf mold. So I always collect in my cold composting area all the leaves that I rake up from around. And so I always have just slowly decomposing leaves to put on top of the weeds. You see the weeds have now disappeared. And then this is my chicken manure that I then spread on top of this. This is a stimulant. And because I'm dealing with brown layers, and this vetiver is very lignous or carbonaceous, as it browns, the chicken manure will help it decompose. And then this was a picture taken a couple of days ago. You can see the vetiver underneath here. You can see some watergrass starting to peek back in. And you can see how fast this callaloo, which had almost disappeared 4 weeks ago, but I did leave young ones like I always do, has just exploded. It's hard to differentiate to see the growth of the dasheen, but it grew considerably and has now closed canopy. And so there's no weeds underneath here anymore. I'm considering putting another layer of material on top of this and remulching it with the vetiver. But if we back up a slide or two, this was what I was getting under this yesterday after about 5, maybe 6 weeks of decomposition. So this is the top layer of vetiver, and this is the watergrass and lendus vines that's now definitely blackening and decomposing. And most importantly, is mostly dead. So it is a way to manage your weeds. I want to say that this feels very natural to me when I'm doing it. It almost makes me wonder if this is how it always used to be done, or so although it's something that I've never seen anyone else do in St. Lucia, I'm curious to know if this trench composting in interbed spaces, pathway composting, I don't know what to call it yet, is being practiced by anyone. In the literature and following the Korean natural farming principle of what your beds need or what the soil needs is what is growing on them, it really centralizes that focus in that I'm keeping everything that is on these beds at least close to these beds and so the microbial communities are never leaving the area and are there and can move back into the beds either side. And then, of course, what generally happens is when the dry season comes, I'm going to take all of this decomposed material and spread it back on the beds or use it as my planting compost in the trenches or planting holes that I'm going to establish on these beds. So the material goes directly back on the beds. We therefore are cutting out the transportation of the materials on farm, which is one of the most tedious parts of compost building, is that you have to collect material and move it. And then you say you're going to move it later, you leave it there, you don't move it, it kind of disintegrates, and you didn't really put it in a spot that was beneficial to the bed, and you didn't hold it in a way where the decomposition was controlled and the volatilization of the organic matter was moderated. So the system that I'm showing you here is able to moderate or slow down or control the decomposition, so we still have substantial material to put onto our beds. Okay, So the final thing that I'm going to talk about today is agroecological orchestration. And I am going to only take a minute or two to talk about this because I'm hoping that this moves into our discussions after. And this goes back to the concept that a deep understanding of the complementary ecological niches we can orchestrate systems that maximize diversity and population density to levels that surpass most natural systems. So whenever people say surpassing nature, the hairs on your back are going to go up a little bit, or they should, because nature is edified as a perfect system. And I'm not here to tell you that it's not. But just as the music of crickets and clack-clacks is musical and it's great, if you have a nice drum and other instruments complementing these natural noises, you can create something even greater. And maybe just from a human perspective, but the human perspective is actually what's important to us humans. And we can create systems that may not serve in the ways that nature was designed to do, but they can serve us better. And so if we are able to harness our creativity to synthesize and maximize the relationship, the ecological relationships between plants and ecosystem service providers, and bring in remarkable species that didn't exist in our systems, like vertebrate, like Glaucidia, like countless others, like the fruit trees that we grow, that are super efficient at producing sugar. If we but don't exist in our natural forests for the most part, by introducing these remarkable species and concentrating them and centralizing them and focusing on them, it's actually ridiculous to think that we can't produce systems that outperform the systems that would have been there without our design and orchestration. So I hope to be challenged on that claim. Because I think it's a really important discussion, and there's not too many slides that I can show you that easily represent agroecological orchestration. But I would say we need to mimic the best ones. So the layers within a mature rainforest has to be a starting point. The more layers we have, the more energy. We need to think more and better about how we orient our farms and how we utilize planting patterns. So far too much of it is done haphazardly without understanding the movement of the sun. Much is said about how our ancestors tracked the movement of the sun and the celestial sphere, most focus on religious and ceremonial purposes, but I believe that at least a large portion of it was about understanding the migration of the sun throughout the different times of the year, and to adapt how we design our roads, our farms, and our planting patterns on it. So I invite everybody to think deeply about the architecture of how you lay out your farm. This is something that I'm passionate about, and part of the consulting work I do. So if anyone wants to dig into this deeper, they can contact me. We mentioned focusing on creating these biomass and biodiversity accumulation zones. So this is one of the core tenets of permaculture and agroecology. I can't stay on it too long. Water, again, is a key component of the focus of this training, although we've been focusing on soil and plant management. They're so connected that, and perhaps I should mention again, infiltration capacity. So root systems are what creates infiltration or increases infiltration capacity, because soil organic matter, as we know, is what creates stable aggregates. And if we're talking about water management, we need aggregated, well-draining soil that has the capacity of its aggregates not to break down when saturated for short periods of time and hold water in the profile. So with regards to water, I wasn't able to include water on-farm water management strategies. So how we orient our farm to not only reduce the speed and erosive power of the movement of water, but maximize storage. I'm hoping that this can come up in the questions as well, because this is something that is a focus of my research. Well, everything I do here. So we're in a dry place, and so we're trying to store millions of gallons of water, right? I'm trying to get even past the hundreds of thousands water in the system. Okay, we're almost, I think this is our last slide. Orchestrating the system layout to best utilize both cropping and non-cropping areas. So again, I mentioned our pathways, our drains. This is critically important and circles back to water management. I think this is the low-hanging fruit of how we can manage water better. Is just we seem to be making consistent errors in the way we drain our farms, and how we and not incorporating planted plants into our drainage systems where the most nutrients and water gather. And therefore, these areas can be our biodiversity hubs. So I'm hoping that everybody has that takeaway from this presentation. And I'm really excited to move into the questions. I'm sorry that I took about 15 or 20 minutes too long, but I'm hoping we still have a time for a robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Damian. I am sure the information shared is pretty much relevant there, and going a bit in the detail. I'm sure some of the participants are appreciative that you delved a bit deeper into it. And so with that, we are now into the discussions section. I would have seen some persons put in some of their experiences. Of course, please feel free to share not only your questions, but also if you have experience in the area, if you had something that has worked, the experiments that you have done yourself, that is definitely welcomed. I would have seen your hand up for a little while now, Janice. Is it that you wanted to ask a question? Are you with us, Janice? Okay, I'm not seeing any reaction from Janice. I see your hand up, Coco.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I could hear you. Lovely.
Okay, yeah. Hi. My name is Coco. So, what an amazing, let me see if I can do video. Sorry. Okay. I really truly enjoyed the presentation. So I have two little questions. So number one, the country that I'm really focusing on is Guyana. And as far as like their soil type, which I believe is like a clay-like sandy loam, what are your thoughts as far as like when it comes to bone meal and trichoderma? I think I'm saying it wrong.
I don't have too much experience with trichoderma. I have used bone meal quite a bit. And please, I also want to mention, if there's any others that are listening, please don't feel or hesitate to jump in if you have answers. I'm not pretending that I have all the answers. And I'm here to learn as well and share. I think bone meal is a very great. I've had great results using it. The calcium is an important part of the puzzle if we're dealing with soil texture. There are other forms of calcium. If you mentioned clay first, and I'm assuming that this is a flat land, flooded area where we have kind of heavy clays that could be on top of sandy layers as well. So gypsum is, I think it's calcium sulfate, is very much recommended if we're seeking to change a clay soil texture quickly. So I would do some research into this. It would be much more cost effective adding gypsum than bone meal, but I think bone meal is something very important that we should be developing in the region, especially larger countries that are producing, I'm assuming producing a lot of animal wastes. I'm not sure of the industries to produce bone meal, but it is something that we're producing and it's something that we should be utilizing.
So,
something very
sorry, would you say that it's better than vermicompost and like a bio NPK? Is it better than you know, your potash and your
it's hard to find something that's better than vermicompost, okay? But the issue with vermicompost would be quantities. So I'm not sure of the scale you're growing at, but getting enough vermicompost to make a significant impact on a field scale is difficult. Vermicompost is highly recommended for nursery, where you can inoculate with the huge microbiome associated with vermicompost at the critical stage. So my experience, I've done vermicompost. I'm actually, as you brought it up, it's something that I'm hoping is something that we explore more deeply in the region because I think it has huge potential. But there seems to be some restrictions on bringing in the composting worms. And a lot of our technocrats are rightly trying to protect our indigenous worm species, but perhaps more research and a little thought needs to be done on how we can expand vermicomposting using the most appropriate vermicomposting worms available. You mentioned something else besides vermicompost. You said comparing bone meal to vermicompost and something else.
Okay, so you say for the most part, vermicompost is better than bone meal.
Yeah, it's on a small scale. Because of the microbial impact and the implications.
Okay, lastly, because I know there are other questions. So when you talk about like granular fertilizer compared to a liquid fertilizer, when you talk about as far as spending like application, just with the liquid I'm assuming that it's better to like to put it like in the very root. So which one would you say? If you compare the granular fertilizer compared to a liquid fertilizer, which one would be better when it comes down to you know, planting agricultural crop?
Let me be careful as I answer this. I'm a natural farmer and I have dedicated myself to moving away from granule fertilizers. But I've had to experiment with it. And I will not say that it is of no use. We have our entire agricultural food system, right? In a way to thank for the ability of granule fertilizers to work. Okay, and that's undeniable. I'm not sure if that point was being challenged or not. I hope it is because we need to challenge it because the repercussions of using granule fertilizer are serious. And they really, really do damage the environment. And within the context of this discussion, granular fertilizers can actually cripple and even destroy the soil microbiome. And granular fertilizers force a plant to transform its nitrogen uptake mechanisms to that requires up to 4 times as much water. Right? So if we can provide nitrogen in the form of amino acids, proteins, it's much, much better and much easier for the, it's like baby food for the plant versus giving a plant, a baby a steak. Yeah, there's lots of nutrients in that steak. That's probably good for the baby, but is it in a form that that baby can digest, right? So the more we can move away from granular fertilizer and apply formula, which is, I would equate to fertigation or liquid fertilizer. Formula is not as good as breast milk. Nutrients supplied to the plant by the microbiome, that's the breast milk. That's the best we can do. That's nature. That's nature solutions. That's it. But if you can't provide breast milk, you have to provide formula. And formula is better than steak for a baby. So I would say for young plants, please be very careful spreading NPK fertilizers at planting or before planting. If you are going to use any granular fertilizer, it has to be a weak formulation and used very lightly. Some people say these granular fertilizers should only be applied after 45 days because that's when plants are going to need the loading of these nutrients to produce their fruit. And that's when the impact on the rhizosphere and the microbiome is now minimized. I hope that helps.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks for your questions, Coco. Who's speaking to add? Go ahead.
My name is Ronaldo. I'm from Guyana as well. But I would not like to challenge, but more or less like to add to what Damien was saying. I would have attempted my own experiment with hydroponic based fertilizers where I added the liquid fertilizer around the base of the plants, and I've seen great results from that.
I would comment that makes a lot of sense because hydroponic fertilizer formulations have a huge concentration on micronutrients, right? So by applying those hydroponically formulated fertilizers, you're going to get, especially if done in the right, if you get the sweet spot with concentration, it's going to stimulate the microbiome. And that's what we want. So I'm glad to hear that confirmation.
Thank you.
Thanks for the addition there. I see we have Monroe's hand up. Go ahead, Monroe. Are you still with us, Monroe? Okay.
Hi, good morning. Good morning, Kelly. Good morning, everyone. Just about two brief questions, if I may. So, yeah. First question was, what support plans can you suggest for the Caribbean nations for fast growth and shade for establishing orchards in the case of establishing agroforestry systems for production, not say wood, but fruits, whether it's going to be a diversity of avocados and mangoes and fruits that can be processed? What support plans would you recommend in the initial stage to partner with them? And what are your thoughts on establishing agroforestry using air-layered plants and seed support plants? So my production food might be all air-layered, whereas the companion plants that provide shade or nitrogen fixing, that kind of thing, put all of them from seed.
Okay, I'm really glad you asked these questions. So Madre de Caco is, I think, the Spanish name for Glaucidia. In St. Lucia, we call it Gloricida. And if I was to, do you have it? You know what I'm referring to?
Gloricidia sepium. We use it for good for ruminant feed.
Yes, yes. So it is, from my experience, kind of one of the first steps you should take if you want to establish agroforestry tree line breaks, and for many reasons, and probably too many to go into now. We could do a whole workshop on just Glaucidia, but if you're not familiar, it grows by cuttings. And also just sticking a piece of wood of any size into the ground, even a big stump will regrow for you. and then you can establish fencing. Within agroforestry systems, I encourage people to think about incorporating animals as well. So Gloricida or Glycidia also allows you to establish fence lines, which could be of critical importance. Another one that I would suggest, so what I do is I alternate every 10 to 15, maybe 20 feet, I put a strong Glycidia post, and then in between I experiment with local woods that regrow or grow by cuttings to establish the fence line, and I use moringa. So moringa is not very strong, but it also grows from the stick. So that's, in other words, it layers, like you mentioned. So anything that grows by cuttings is layering. It also grows by seed. It grows better by seed. So if you can seed moringa along your fence lines, that would be a great thing to do, because it produces a better taproot and is more drought tolerant and wind resistant when you grow it from seed. So I'm sure most of us should be familiar with moringa. Get moringa in there. Moringa is something that can stay there forever because it doesn't produce enough shade to really interfere with most, to reduce the potential of most tree crops that it's shading.
Okay,
Whereas
quick question.
perhaps Gloricidia, over time you have to be pruning it, but then it produces huge amounts of organic matter. You have another question?
Just to double back a little bit, you said besides Gloricidia and the moringa, you would use locally adaptive plants that regrow. So things like Leucaena, that would not be an option. So Leucaena, you're supposed to follow.
Leucaena is not indigenous to us, and you have to be very careful with it. I have a funny story which I won't tell, in case I might incriminate myself. But I had a lot of ambitions with Leucaena, and my father curses me every day that I brought it to our farm, because it is one of those plants that can't escape. But having said that, if you wanted to set up or regenerate an area that's wild bush and you wanted to produce charcoal or biochar, which we didn't mention today, Leucaena, there's nothing better than Leucaena for producing biomass and for stabilizing soil. It has the most hardest to remove root system that I've ever encountered. But I would strongly advise at this stage not to incorporate Leucaena into your farming system unless you're there all the time and never let it go to seed, right? With regards to local species, we have species here. We sometimes call it, well, I don't like this name, but it's called the naked Indian sometimes, or I'm forgetting the patois name right now. But it's a copper-colored plant with a skin that peels off. Bois-Canoe, sometimes it's, no, not Bois-Canoe. The name's escaping me, but it can be cut in sticks and used to establish a fence line. So it's going to have an association with our indigenous microorganisms that's superior than perhaps Gloricidia, although Gloricidia has been here so long that it is indigenized, if that's a word. But any plant, if you want to test if something layers, you just scrape its skin. And if its bark comes off in your fingernail and you see green underneath it, it can most likely layer. So that's why citrus and these things layer well, is because you could scrape citrus and you'll see green. So that means woody parts are
I
able
have
to
the skill to ear layer. I have the skill to ear layer. It was more what support plants would you recommend? Like for in my mind, I would do say maybe pigeon peas,
excellent,
moringa and Gloricidia, and then I'll figure out how to manage the Gloricidia because I do livestock also.
Good. If you do livestock also, then these are great choices. So I think you're on the right track. The poangol or the pigeon pea is an excellent one. I like castor. I believe there's something that we need to learn about castor. And I would also say, look at species that you might be afraid of. Like, I don't know what they call it there. We have something called malunga. It's like a wild dasheen that only the pigs can eat. It becomes a weed as well. They have false gingers. These type of things, although you need to be able to control them, if you can get these bulbous forbs type of root systems into your tree breaks, in and around your tree breaks, you're going to increase the soil organic matter input into the system and diversify the soil microbiome. So then, and I mentioned castor because it's not a legume. We also have to incorporate species that are non-leguminous.
Leguminous.
Yeah, for diversity. But I think what you mentioned, you're on the right track. So follow your instincts, and more is better. But be careful with Lucina.
Okay, one last thing while I have you.
Great.
So that means it's you're encouraging a more linear layout for the agroforestry, or it could be dispersed, sporadic, however you say it.
It depends on your context, right? So if you're on a flat land, if you want to make things look interesting and pretty, you could think about, there's nothing wrong with any type of design. What I would tell you is, if you're going to use linear or curvatures, think about the movement of the sun first. Think about
Definitely.
your solar climax, where your sun is, during the summer months, like right now, when it's at its peak heat, right? And orienting your species so that if you want shade, that you're maximizing your shade and locating your shade where you want it. So that's kind of the critical thing with layout. I'm partial to both curves and straight lines, but there's utility to having certain parts of your farm linear in terms of management, especially if you're going to be managing, especially if you're building fences and managing animals. So that's a consideration. I have a garden that's very linear, and I also have a circular garden, which I hope to share pictures of in the near future. So be creative, use your intuition, and don't always use the natural topography and the shapes that you see around you as signposts and guidelines. But there's no one best way.
Lovely. Thanks for your questions, Monroe. Do hope you got ample information there that is useful to you. And thanks, Damien. I see we have Robert. Robert, you can go ahead. Are you still with us, Robert?
Ariel Roberts. I just raised my hand.
Sorry, Robert Tuloch. We going in order of the hand raised, but I'm not hearing from him. We'll get to you soon.
Yes, I am here.
Okay.
I am here. It's just
yes, go ahead.
Just trying to get to unmute and something went wrong.
Oh. No problem.
Greetings again, everyone. I heard mention regarding granular fertilizer. And you say granular fertilizer is not best to apply to the plant. What happened regarding the granular fertilizer? Granular, as far as I'm concerned, because I'm trying to see, I was looking back at if I could find any data regarding that. But with granular fertilizer is applied to whether it's old or young plant, is that you apply the granular fertilizer in the soil first, then cover the soil, then plant, and then use your irrigation, and then the plant will pick up the fertilizer. So that is the way you can use the granular fertilizer, and that is the way we have been using it, and I've been using it, and it has worked wonders. It's worked pretty well.
Right. So I don't know if you noticed, but when I started talking about it, I tried to be careful not to discredit the utility and the proven productive abilities of granular fertilizer use. And I think the way you described it is a responsible method in that you're not exposing it to the elements, that you're burying it a little bit so that it has a slower release. What I would say is, if you have to use granular fertilizer, you do it, you try and reduce the amounts you use year by year, and observe if you can maintain your yields by adding organic matter to the system, right? Because what is the research is proving is that when granular fertilizer is applied to healthy soils, they have a much better efficiency than when they're applied to dead soils or soils that are not alive. So I encourage farmers, and I don't want to ridicule or ostracize people or the opinion that granular fertilizers are even necessary, because they well might be necessary for your system at this time. But what I would challenge you on is that if we're talking about nature-based solutions, and we are saying that nature can produce all the nitrogen, potassium, and fertilizer for massive amounts of biomass production, and this is proven, then there is always room to shift our practices towards more natural practices, even if we have to do this slowly and incrementally. The final thing I would say is if you're going to apply fertilizer in a preparatory manner before you plant, you should do it. We should be careful not to do it haphazardly, and to do it in ways or in bands that we know its location and that it is unlikely to interfere with the root system at too young a stage. So I would try to advise you to fight the impulse to get fertilizer as close to the young plants as we can in order to like give it the boost it needs. I know that that's our impulse, but I would say if you want to give young plants that early boost, try using liquid fertilizer if you're only using fertilizer, and also try and use natural fertilizers. So fish hydroxide, I won't attempt it. Fish emulsion and the other forms of fish fertilizers, seaweed, these other things. Even if you have to mix in a little bit of chemical with it, try and start shifting your practice away from just pure chemicals, because I do want to emphasize that the spreading of granular fertilizer, most of it, and the research, you're not going to believe it, is showing that 80% of it never gets to your plant, right? So 80% of it is either washed down through the soil profile or washed off or volatilized or in a form that's not accessible to the plant. And so it is not an efficient way to feed plants, and we should be trying to shift our practices away from it, even if we have to do that incrementally.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you so much.
It's not that
Okay,
I'm
go
not
ahead, Rob.
agreeing with you, you know, but I'm just putting that out because as a land management officer for the parish, which are the island which I work in, granular fertilizer has been used, yes, but what we do, we entrust the farmers that they also must use soil amendments, and the soil amendments it is organic farm, and when you use it in organic farm, then and there, even when you use the granular fertilizer, it will be more readily available. And farmers, you know, land is not growing, land is not getting any more, it is getting less. So we implore farmers who are overusing the land, because the one piece of land they have, so we recommend using soil amendments, and which is in its organic form, to enhance production and productivity.
Good. Glad to hear that you're doing that. I want to mention one more thing. I used to use a lot of chicken manure directly. And although this is better than granular fertilizer from an ecological perspective, it operates in basically the same way and can pollute our river courses with nitrates in the same way as well. So it is not the panacea for getting nitrogen to the plants. And as we're on the topic of nitrogen, I just want to reiterate and emphasize that there are different forms of nitrogen. If you're going to use chemical nitrogen, urea is probably the one that costs the least to the plant and the microbiome to uptake. But nitrate fertilizers take a lot of water, right? So a lot of times where we are seeing crops under water stress where we didn't have water stress before at this point in the season, it's because we've increased the amount of nitrogen granule fertilizer we're adding to compensate for crop productivity loss. So this is a conundrum that's happening all over the world. So I just want to flag these things and again reiterate that the best form of nitrogen for plants is proteins and amino acids, right? And so if we can, because this is how nature does it, through the decomposition of humic substances, and as we move down the trophic levels within the soil microbiome, and their nitrogen is then given to the plant in the forms that they can easily uptake. So that's a great point to make, and an important point, because farmers have to, we're not doing our work if we're ostracizing chemical based farming solutions in the region, because that's what we have. And that's what the legacy that we're all born into is. And it would be ridiculous for us to just say that it's the wrong thing to do and leave farmers with nothing. But I just challenge you to think about transitioning and not being stuck on standing on practices, even if they appear to be working. As you mentioned, they're depleting and degrading and eroding our soils.
Okay, thank you for that. So while we continue through the questions, I know some persons do have to leave, and so what I will do, I will launch the feedback poll on the screen while we continue the questions. So Julian, you can go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, I could hear you.
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity. I'm from Dominica, the child of the Caribbean, and it's called the child for a particular reason. So we have been traditionally using traditional systems of farming, which is natural farming systems, which I see you have so academically presented. But I have a couple of questions here. One is your experience with mycorrhizal associations and the natural systems or organic systems you were talking about. The second one is your experience with the variation in the use of organic compost or composting manure systems based on the natural life stages of the plant to optimize the yield. I'm more particularly concerned about the level of phosphates in the natural system at the early stage of growth. And as we all know, all plants absorb nutrients in the ionic form, elemental form, and not the organic molecules. So the question is, how do we build up sufficient amounts of the nutrient capacity of the soil to allow the plant to get enough of the defined nutrients at various stages of growth in the cycle, and for not just for leafy plants, like short-term leafy plants like vegetables, like lettuce, for example, but plants which have a higher demand on soil nutrient uptake. And the third question would be on the question of the scaling up of the natural farming systems. In regards to what do you think in regards to upskilling with mechanization using techniques like green manuring, and other techniques that could be used to scale up the operations. We also know we have things like for following in rotational forms, if you have sufficient land to do that. Following with livestock rearing, like cows. That's a practice we use in Dominican. Farmers put cows on an area of land for a year and come back to farm in that area after a year, while they farm in another area. But generally, how do we apply? How do we cater for all those variants and the technical requirements to optimize crop growth to make it economic? Because at the end of the day, if it's not economic, no matter how good it is, it will not necessarily, the movement towards that natural farming system will be very, very slow until consumer prices rise for food. Very interestingly, as someone mentioned about land becoming limited, the question of land availability for farming and movement into urban vertical farming systems now. How do we incorporate natural farming systems into vertical farming systems that is currently being taken off at a very high pace around the world because of the reduction in number of farmers age, the capacity, the infrastructure capacity requirements to set up on-farm roads and hauling materials, the rapidness of distribution of yield to consumers, the less transportation, the amount of production required to feed rising populations within cities, where most other people are gravitating to in the world, and so on. So yeah, but I appreciate the presentation, and it really brings back a lot of old school methods that some of us will be aware of, or parents or grandparents used to use in their farming practices. And even now, there are many traditional farmers that continue to do that, those kinds of techniques as well.
Well,
okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. And the questions you asked are excellent. And I can see that you're carrying a lot on your mind and a heavy load. And I think I will not be able to answer all of those questions right now. But let me, a few thoughts that came up as I was taking notes on your question. Urban agriculture and land access, a lot of the natural farmers that are out there right now that are scaling, and that's where I want to focus my answer, is how do we scale this? Began by starting small in urban settings. So I see the small scale urban setting as like the incubator program for natural farming, because at small scale, you're able to think about things and experiment with things that are just not possible on the field scale. With regards to, I'm going to bunch together the mycorrhizal system conversation with the compost and with access to nutrients and phosphates, because and there's a lot to be said about this, so I'm going to be careful in how much depth I go into at this point. But mycorrhizal networks, for those that aren't too familiar, basically double, triple, 10 times, 100 times increase the capacity of a plant's root system when these connections are formed early enough, are stable enough, and are able to connect to parent materials and organic substances that they can derive nutrients from. So mycorrhizal communities are well known for being able to go in and mine phosphorus off of parent material and deliver them to the plants. So if you have well-established, stable mycorrhizal communities, you should not have phosphorus deficiencies, period, because phosphorus is not an element that is actually missing in too many of our soils. There may be some where rock phosphate or additional phosphorus needs to be added. The reason that phosphorus is so critical in our fertilizer compositions is because the phosphorus that we have that's indigenous in our soils is not accessible. So the mycorrhizal communities and the entire soil microbiome have the ability, when they're functioning properly, to provide all of the phosphorus that any plant requires, because there's huge reservoirs in the soil. Now, that moves to the scaling question: is how do we get soil that has this capacity and does not require as much fertilization, and can support crops like dasheen or other root crops that have a huge demand for these nutrients. You mentioned green manuring and fallowing and animal agriculture, and I think you have the answers. So, and you also mentioned the pressure that farmers are under to produce on all of their land, all of the time. So, and that is a critical land access issue, and we have to reconfigure our primary focuses, that we are not just preparing all of our farm and planting all of our farm. That is almost a guaranteed path to ecological collapse on your farm, right? Even if it seems like an insurmountable challenge in the short term, you have to find ways to green fallow areas. You have to incorporate animals into your system at certain points of time, even if they're small animals like worms or chickens or others. But so I do want to mention the importance of ruminant digestive systems, the soil regeneration, and the soil microbiome. This is of critical importance. Again, I didn't have time to go into these, because animal rearing is natural, and animal rearing has now been proven to be another hack or shortcut to soil health. Like I said, I also want to mention compost, because again, if we're scaling, unless, I'm not saying scaling composting operations so that we can provide the microbiome, soil organic matter, and nutrients to our plants using compost is not possible. But at this point, it is unrealistic. And there would have to be a big shift in or increase in municipal level composting. So every time trees are trimmed along the roads, every function that we do would have to go to centralized composting facilities. There would have to be in order to create compost at the amounts that would be required to scale natural farming. Additionally, the addition of compost, like I said, as an input that is just replacing chemicals is not sustainable. And the argument can be made that when we use compost in an input manner like this, we are actually contributing to net greenhouse gas emissions, because most of this compost volatilizes and is gone or untraceable after a season or two. There's plenty of research in the modern organic farming, industrial organic farming, that speaks to this. So the final thing I will say is, you mentioned green manuring and regenerative farming practices. So if we're in the bigger countries like Guyana, Trinidad, and Jamaica, and the Haiti and the other islands, we can look at large-scale mechanized regenerative farming practices, and these are now being adapted to the tropical setting. So the crimping machines that take a cover crop or a green manure crop, crimp them or kill them, mat them down to protect the soil surface, and then allow for a drill to come in after and plant directly into the green manure mat without plowing. This type of equipment is available that could attach to your tractors in these bigger islands or wherever you're mechanized, and we need to start experimenting with this. primary to this would be us being able to cover crop in a consistent enough manner and identifying the species within our tropical cover crops that are able to respond well to these crimping machines. I think that's all I can do right now, but I can see you're carrying a heavy load and you're asking the right questions.
Okay, thank you. So we will go to Ariel. We also had some questions in the chat that we'll take after the hands, persons with their hands up. So Ariel, go ahead.
Thank you. So Damien, I had a question about what animals you use on your farm, and then also if you are on any platforms like Workaway or Woofing where people can come and work and learn on your farm.
So I'll answer the second question first. We are planning our grand opening this January. So as I finish this presentation, I'm going and work on the bathroom, kitchen, and classroom facility. I'm strapping on the hammer and the saw to do that work. So I'm fighting right now to open up so that we can start welcoming guests as early as next year. So I would please take my email down. I hope that can be presented for anyone that wants to contact me directly. It's my name at Gmail. And definitely my wife and we have received interns and woofers 20 years ago, believe it or not. We started with that. But we want to make the experience something that is great. And so as a little bit of a perfectionist, I've waited up until now. In terms of animals, my plan right now, I've been kind of building the farm part-time as I do other work. And so I had cows and this proved to be full-time work for me. Because I didn't have correct fencing. And so I was tying and moving cows and dealing with all the hardships of being a shepherd. And it was a little too much for me. And so I would recommend goats. So that's what my the next phase after January, maybe February, March, or likely after this next dry season. So I'm building my goat fences now, and chickens are going to be the ones that I focus on in the short term, and also worms. So I'm not giving up on vermicomposting, and even vermicomposting to feed chickens is something that I'm interested in. I used to live across from a pig pen, but I've been doing research and having a few pigs and a pig pen where you could put straw and materials and collect the urine and feces in a smart manner is an amazing way, and maybe add in some biochar is in a way amazing way to fuel your system. So, and I'm not saying cows aren't great as well, but they were just challenging for me at my scale. But the answer is what works for you and at your scale it has to be what you experiment with. But having the baseline understanding that it is worth trying to incorporate animals into your system.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay. So we have Janice hands up now. Go ahead, Janice. Okay, I see Janice put her hand
Yes,
down.
good
Okay, go ahead, Janice.
morning to everyone.
Hi,
Thank you
good
so much,
day.
Damien. I'm representing the Jamaica Organic Agriculture Movement.
Oh, Jome,
And,
I got my certification from Jome, 2006. I had a lovely time in Jamaica. I haven't been back there
in
in a
St.
while.
Anne? You did the inspector course in St. Anne?
I can't remember exactly where I did it. There was a cohort of us. I know Knife, a Rastaman that I'm seeing online, was there with me, and Marcus Braun was who I stayed with. I'm not sure if he's still around. But,
yeah, he's in Portland. He's here. But thank you so much for your presentation. Just to inform the general audience that in Jamaica, we're embarking on a soil fertility, soil regeneration project in collaboration with the Ministry of Agriculture. We call it Genesis. And we're teaching 11 strategies across the island, starting in the first 6 parishes on the eastern leg. So we started with composting, which included vermicomposting, the Johnson's food technique, as well as standard static composting. So that was the first module. And the second one was land management, which did a little bit of sugar culture and contours and mulching and so on. So all of those things are very important with regards to the whole process. And the third one, we're working with the effective microorganisms, which is recognizing the importance of these microorganisms. And so there's a solution in using conjunction with molasses, and it helps to build the microbiome and so on. So just to let you all know that we're working, and it's supposed to be island-wide. So all parishes should be impacted over the 3 years, and the importance of soil fertility, soil regeneration, and the respect for what it is you have. So we're trying to kind of build sustainability across the island, and the trainings are free. So it's open to the public. They come on. We have demonstration sites that are setting up in all parishes. So, you know, they'll be able to learn the techniques. And of course, it's focused on organic, but it's open to anybody who is interested in good practices, agricultural practices, because there's the best practices that we're highlighting. So conventional farmers are welcomed as well. Okay.
Okay.
So
Thanks
thank you
for
so
that,
much.
Janice.
Okay.
You could probably put in the information in the chat for any person from Jamaica who is on with us that would be interested in this.
And we
Yes,
have a farmer-to-farmer conversation usually on a Sunday afternoon, so that we also will share when we have our webinar. Okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Janice. Okay, so with that, we'll take Chani. After that, I will take a question from the chat.
Yeah, greetings and thank you very much, Damien. Thank you for the presentation for sure. And I wanted to perhaps add some other perspective to the conversation, as well as acknowledge what it really takes to, because I think that is a very important thing, what it really takes to try to make something work in terms of farming. It does take the science, it does take the art, it does take the commitment, it does take a certain energy to actually do that, whether you want to craft it as a business or a hobby. But it does take, contrary to popular belief, it is not just a no-head kind of thing. You know, you really have to contextualize that and be very observant from both the scientific and the art and whatever kind of thing that. So that I think has to be underscored, and I thank you for at least bringing that holistic integration of so many different facets of life into that. The reason why I say I'm starting at that point is because we have to address the mindset. And one of the key things too, in terms of measuring success in the agriculture on a farm, is too often how well the plant grows. And so it is almost like you have an entire family. You have a family, your family, you have several kids, you have an environment. However, when you put the fertilizer, you're only singling out one aspect, which is how fast the plant is growing. You are not looking at the other ecosystem things. You're not looking at how it contributes to the entire whole. You are looking and focusing on one aspect, and that is how you're measuring success. And by that analogy, it could never be sustainable because you are missing out critical aspect. And so while certain things are important, yes, you will see immediate results, you will see an advancement in certain things, the mindset always have to ask what happened to the other element of the system, because everything is connected. And if you are able to harness that connection, then you have that sustainability that we often talk about. So I think I want to underscore that as one of the critical issues. What that brings to is, and I heard a lot of persons asking that, what is the best solution for that? What is the best solution for that? And in the earlies, I saw you committed and then you reacted again and said, well, hey, I'm not telling you the best solution. There are options, but the context of your of your situation would really dictate what may work better for you. And I think that is an important message, because quite often you have the need, or persons think that you just need one silver bullet, and because it works there, it has to work there. It is really understanding the concepts and understanding the factors and know what you're looking at. Your headset is not just on one element, and really going through that and getting that solution that works for you. And it's not only for the system alone, it must be an element of you that you found it. And I'm very glad when you said, you made a comment where you're talking about the trench compost and you said it feels natural to you, right? That is very important, because that's an aspect that is going to motivate you to continue. Getting a little deeper into the technical issues now, which I think are very important. I'm very glad that you highlighted the importance of root and root health. That is the interface, that is really the connection to the system. And too often a lot of attention has not been paid to that, particularly the physiology and the architecture of the roots. And also the microbiology as the roots in terms of the interface to the soil. But I wanted to go a little step further. And the further that I want to go with the roots and the root system there, particularly, is if you're going with the roots and you're focusing on the root system, there's another equal concept that needs to be focused on in agriculture, which is the concept of enrichment or non-enrichment. If you look at the natural systems there is not most times, and you could equate it, you use the analogy of the baby, but I want to go a little deeper. You must allow again, those of us that have family, it is not always a good thing to enrich or have your child or your friend entitled or easy access to everything that is already there. It is not a good thing at all. And that is not just for a family, it is also for biological entities as well. So there must be an appreciation of enrichment and convenience. And that is even with plants from the experience. And that is where having fertilizers or having dense nutrient systems, whether it is through granular fertilizer, whether it is through compost, whether it's through anything, that has to be weighed against the trade-off, because what it is creating is a kind of a convenience that does not allow the plant to forage and build these systems very efficiently to make the best use of it. So I wanted to introduce that into the concepts that you would have shared, the concept of enrichment and non-enrichment, that persons have that mentality that the more I give and I have it there. You use the breast milk as well. You look at nature in terms of the fruit. There's not a huge packing or dense of nutrients there, because we think the density of the nutrients, and you have nutrient dense products, that is what happens. No, it is really the balance of it that enables that to do that. You really need that push and pull so that the plant makes both best use of it, and also in times of shock, and this is where it is important, in times of shock, the plants are able, because they have developed that capacity, they could be ambitious and be more resilient. So I wanted to leave that first of all, because that's very, very important to underscore as we go forward. With that, I would want to come on the issue of compost as well. And not only compost, you mentioned vermicompost. And again, I want to single that out as a mindset and a combination of the enrichment that I spoke of. If you're going to look at compost, and whatever type of compost, whether it's cold or hot compost, as a mechanism for enrichment based upon an argument of nutrients, the concept is not fully grasped as yet, right? So that's one of the things that I want to underscore. The other thing quickly, I know that we're going in, there is a very important thing, whether it's the microbiome or whether you're talking about bigger organisms like plants. The native and indigenous species, what is there, the emphasis must also be on that, not just from a use of, not from a viewpoint of how we use it, but from a point of their informing the status of what is happening there. And so that's very important. I mean, you didn't say it directly like this, but the use of indigenous is very, very important as signposts to what is happening and to connect to the understanding of your ecosystems there. And too often, if you get rid of them, particularly things like weeds and different other things, you are cheating yourself of a full understanding of what the earth is telling you, what the system is telling you, what you have to deal with, etc. And you are imposing what you think is necessary. Particularly, I've seen it a lot. You spoke about vetiver being used for soil erosion. I have seen vetiver, I've literally seen situations where persons would go into a place that has a slope. They would have met some shrubs already growing there established. They would have removed it and they would have placed vetiver. And replace it with vetiver. Now, I am not saying that there's not a space for that. I am saying that these are critical observations that you should have, mainly because what you have to also recognize, and that has been proven from a long time, the further that you move most plant species from the point of origin or where they're establishing, the more that you're creating a context where you have to baby and husband it and put more into the system. And that is a basic, I'm not saying it's always so, but that is a basic kind of principle. If you want to exert and you have the time to manage and pretty up and give the fertilizers, etc., then that is good. But if you are in a position where nature is already telling you, I could fit there, I could grow there, etc., I have a particular function, it might cost you less to work along that than to try to work against that. So that's another principle I just wanted to drop there very, very shortly. I will stop there, but there are many other issues that I think conceptually and also that will inform our mindset on how we do things that need revisiting. Last thing I will say about the amino acids. There are, I know most persons here, again, because of the education, they are at the point where they do think that the only way that plants absorb nitrogen is from the elemental form or from the, what we call the inorganic forms. All right. The research has shown, and that has been for some time, that there are plants that can absorb amino acid. The debate is still out onto how expansive that is in terms of how widespread, whether all of the plants could actually do that and do that efficiently. So that is still an issue there, and that is highly dependent on the amino transport, how close it is on the cell to the soil solution as well. So that water dynamic still comes in there. So that is something that we should keep in mind and research a little bit, because what that means, and this is my last point it brings me to, what that means is that you are now considering the energetics of the plant, meaning that you are in your mind conceptually, you're asking the question like you do for yourself, how much energy does this take for the plant to do, and whether the net energy that is needed is worth the investment. So just like you as a person here, you eat, you think you need a particular energy, the plant also needs particular energy to do certain things. If it's able to absorb amino acids, that means that without that energy, that means that you have skipped a step, because when it absorbs the other form of nitrogen, guess what? It turns it into amino acids, which is the basic structure of microorganism. So if it could absorb it in that form, that means that you don't need that large amount of energy to go to that step. And so there are, in some instances, energy saving. So that's the last thing that I would, in terms of conceptually, that I would ask persons to think of as we continue trying to be more sustainable with what we are doing. Over. Thank you.
Thanks, Johnny, for the addition there. Go ahead, Damian.
Yeah, thanks for those clarifications and those points of emphasis. I have taken some notes, and I will continue to pursue those. And I will steal your metaphor for entitled children, that we need to avoid that when we're formulating how we feed our plants. But great to see you.
Let me take a question from the chat. So there is someone who lives in Barbados, and they're stating that they have high content of limestone. So what are some of the soil methods you would recommend for them in those limestone areas?
It's challenging when we have to alter the soil nature at its elemental level. I mean, I would have to know a little bit about the scale that they want to make interventions and changes at. But the short answer is increasing soil organic matter percentage is the neutralizing is the baseline neutralizing system of the planet. So the functioning of a well-composed, robust, and diverse microbiome will pull down pH and or increase pH as needed. We could think about rock dusts and other inputs as well to maybe stimulate this process in the short term. But really the only solution is organic matter and the soil microbiome. And we will see in short order changes if you enrich these things.
Okay, great. I'll take another one. I'm guessing that person may not necessarily be too deep in the agriculture sector. So they're asking, how does compost improve soil fertility and structure compared to the synthetic fertilizers? If you could provide a bit clarity there for the person.
Well, the synthetics don't do anything to improve soil structure. And well, let me temper that. Their chemistry is going to naturally degrade soil structure for several reasons, but there are indirect reasons why, as I mentioned, healthy, strong plants with robust root systems are then able to improve soil structure. So if chemical or granular fertilizers are applied in ways where plants maximize the foraging of their root systems, as Dr. St. Martin mentioned, and their overall energy ability for their root systems to supply energy to the soil, then they could indirectly improve soil organic matter and soil aggregation that way. But as far as composting does, compost is providing the raw materials for the expanded growth of the soil mycorrhizome, microbiome generally. So it has nutrients, macro and micronutrients that will feed the microorganisms. And it also has humic substances that will be easily uptaken by different members of the microbiome community. So we can look at compost as a stimulant, as a biostimulant that stimulates the proper functioning of the soil. In essence, we're replacing what is degraded by conventional soil management practices when we use compost. It's the Band-Aid, and it is the dressing to the wound, but it is not necessarily the full story or the full solution.
Okay, thank you for that. We will take, I saw they had somebody else, but if you're still on, we will take Laura for now, and if the person is still on, we could take their question. Go ahead, Laura.
Hello, thank you. I have a couple of questions. I know you mentioned the fact of having animals included in your farming practices. What's your thoughts on the use of just actual manure? My space is not exorbitantly huge. I do have chickens, but in terms of using manure in the garden as a soil amendment, in terms of composting, top dressing versus mixing it, that's the first question. Then the second thing is that you mention of liquid fertilizers, mainly fish, seaweed, things of that nature. What's your thoughts in using it as a foliar feed versus a top drench? And then I just want you to expound a little bit. I know you didn't mention it in the presentation because you were out of time in terms of soil retaining water, basically water retention in soils. One thing I've noticed is my soil is very sandy. I've been using some mulching and some carbon material. Do you have any other ideas in terms of increasing the water retention within the soil?
Okay, yeah, great questions. So with regards to the use of animal manure, this is how natural farming and our ancestral farming practices have always functioned. I would even go as far as saying that I would strongly promote the idea that no farming happened in by our ancestrally without the use of animals. So we should using animals within our system is a very important way forward. With regards to the manure's impact on the soil system, as I mentioned, chicken manure, for example, can function almost just like granular fertilizer. And so we therefore have to use caution and be careful when using it. It is always best to at least partially compost these things. So mixing them with carbonaceous materials to start to stimulate the breakdown. Because remember, as we stimulate the breakdown, we're beginning to stimulate the microbial communities. And with microbial communities, the more diversity, the more types of microbes that we're attracting to that manure before we apply it is going to reduce the chances that that manure could have harmful, pathogenic, or even dangerous impacts on our plants and our health. So I know there's some organic farmers and organizations that will forbid the use of animal manures without composting. I don't want to be the one that told you that it is okay to do it, but I've experimented with side dressing with chicken manure, and mind you, I do use mulches to prevent raindrop contamination of fresh mulches. But also I have the assurance that my system is so microbially diverse and robust that the pathogens that could be dangerous to human health are likely going to be outcompeted or destroyed by the beneficial or the community at large that's there. So again, moving from a dead conventional system where very little care has been taken to nurture microbial communities, the use of manure, you need to do it carefully, because that's when contamination and disease-spreading pathogens are introduced, is when conventional farms use these manures. But if you have a backyard or a small scale in the acres range system where you've been taking care of your soil and composting, I would say there's very little risk with using animal manures directly and a lot to benefit. I would also say, I mentioned fish and these other liquid fertilizers, but you can make liquid fertilizer using your chicken manure. And what I would highly recommend is using leaf mold compost, or leaf mold that's taken from your forest. Therefore, you're inoculating it with indigenous microorganisms first, and fermenting it with the leaf mold for at least a couple of weeks, better months, if you're using chicken manure, and then diluting it and giving it to plants as a liquid fertilizer. As mentioned, this is the most effective way to use all natural inputs, is if you can get them in a form where they're accessible to the plant in liquid form. You're going to stretch out the impact of these inputs dramatically. As mentioned, plants have this natural hack that we can feed them through their foliar leaf surfaces. This is in no small part to the microbiome that exists on the leaves. And as Dr. St. Martin mentioned, research is being done to explain how these microorganisms are able to take these various forms of proteins and amino acids and incorporate them directly into the leaves and the sugars. So if you have a chicken manure solution that you brew with leaf mold, you can add other weeds and stuff in it to get some micronutrients. And then you're adding perhaps a starch or sugar source. Molasses, for example, could then be added. Sugars are absorbed through the leaf surfaces as well. And the plant can use these energetically to help with their systems in the short term. It's not a long-term effect, But I hope that answers a little bit about liquid fertilizer. But please, everybody, experiment with liquid fertilizers. The blue drums that you have kicking around the place, put them to use. Get a cover for them. Start fermenting stuff. It's simple. You don't need to do complicated fermenting. You can just use leaf mold to start to encourage these systems. You can stir them once in a while. You don't necessarily need bubblers. If you think it's anaerobic or potentially dangerous, use it as a root soak, as you mentioned, and perhaps don't put it on the leaves. On the leaves, you can use your the brews that you make from plant material, and you will have less likelihood of cross-contamination or contamination with pathogens like E. coli that might be present, and others that might be present in the chicken manures. But experiment and use liquid fertility and build up these muscles and these natural responses that when a plant's in distress, that you're feeding it with these liquid amendments on their plant surfaces or to their roots, and not necessarily throwing granular fertilizer at the base of them.
Okay, thanks for that. I see Chani has his hand up, so we'll take that last comment from Chani and then we will wrap up. Go ahead, Chani.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you for that. Colleagues, I'm listening to the discussion. There is one other thing that I want to just perhaps put into there conceptually. Damien would have emphasized very strongly on the soil microbiome, which is really just the microorganisms that exist in the soil and how they function. Yeah, I would tell you again, there are two things that I always say, let's not be very romantic about approaches and also microbiome, etc. Damien would have made it clear that a lot of when we look at systems, we really ask the question, what we're asking is what works for us, right? And immediately when we do that, we tend to put our head in a particular space that an organism is not being beneficial for us, right? An organism has no interest to be beneficial for us. I know you heard the term of beneficial microbes, right? It is not that the organisms are there to function for us. It is we that are attributing these things to the microorganisms. And so I wanted to just put this point there. There's another point quickly with that is very important. While you have a soil microbiome, which is what is there in the soil itself, you do have that interface or that very close, which is the rhizosphere biome, which is the most important part there, which is really that zone between how the plant communicates and interacts with the soil biome here. This is really the critical point that you want that health to really be there. And so that is a very, very important point as we go forward. The microorganism in itself, there are what we call generalists and specialists as well that make up an ecosystem, meaning that when one is there, there are things that, just like a jack of all trades, if you're looking at cricket, if you want to look at the cricket analogy, there are persons that could bat, bowl, field, etc. These are your generalists, but there are also very specific things like the Ambrose that have been specific to bowling, fast bowling, etc. So it is really that microcosm of microorganisms you have there that are functioning, that even if one is out of the system, others could cover. The reason why I'm also saying this, and we haven't said it in the conversation as yet, the root or the soil microbiome is not the only important thing. You also have a foliar or the leaf microorganism. We haven't spoken about that as yet. But that leaf microbiome, or the organisms that really are on your leaf or in the roots or the leaf zone, are very, very, very important. Mainly from the point of they are the ones that could help mediate or address things like stress. They do play a role in things like plant protection and disease. They're very important in that. And they also play a very role in the general fitness of the plant. So even the issue of biostimulants, why they work and how they work, and connecting that root and leaf biome is very important. So I wanted to leave that message there that it is important to take care of the rhizosphere biome, the microorganisms that are there. But as you start to graduate and you understand a little bit the reasons for certain practices, even applying or not applying foliar fertilizers, you have to consider equally the microorganisms that inhabit these surfaces. So that is the last, the other thing I would say is that, again, for the romantic notion, we haven't spoken about it. And this is why I said about beneficial, we ascribing things to microorganisms. There's the issue of food safety, right, or product safety that we have not really spoken about there. That needs to be also in the conversation. While you talk, whenever you're talking about microorganisms, whether you deem them good or bad, and because food is going to be consumed, that issue of whether at the end, when you do all of these practices and there are some microorganisms, whether it translates into safe food, is a discussion that must be had, because there are things that would increase the general welfare of your farming system, but they may just be dangerous at the end point for microbes that negatively affect us. One of the examples we have found is sulfured, what we call that, molasses, where there's a tendency of E. coli and other things to really inhabit these things, particularly if the process is not done properly in terms of composting and compost tea. So, colleagues, I just wanted to leave that message. Perhaps we can have another session where we discuss, we have to talk about the below ground, we could talk about the above ground and how we could solidify that part as well. Thanks.
Sorry to interject. Chatney, can I please have your contact? Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can just email us at the CCRAF. We will get it. So Chani is my colleague, so we are the ones coordinating the CCRAF. So I will share the email again. So with that, thank you everyone for joining us today. I will just go into the wrap up now. And share the screen.
Sorry,
go ahead, Damian.
Briefly, I just realized there was one important thing that I didn't mention for the last question that I took, and that's regarding water holding capacity in sandy soils. And it's a short answer. The solution is humic substances, and this is derived from organic matter, and this is derived from the soil microbiome. So the solution for that as well is increasing the soil organic matter content. Humic substances glue together and act like how clay substances would help to form aggregates in a loam type of soil. So sorry, I just wanted to add that for the person, because I know it's tough to keep these sandy soils can be challenging, but if you just keep on keeping on, you will see better aggregation in your sandy soils. Sorry for that, but I just wanted to make sure I addressed that.
No problem, Damian, not at all. So thank you so much, Damian, for the wealth of information. Thanks, Shani, for the added information, and to the participants that came in, giving the experience and some added information there. And just to share with you, of course, as I would have mentioned, the certificate of participation, of course, just to show appreciation and that you have some proof that, you know, you attended a session where you build your knowledge on the various areas. And so for persons, it will be awarded to persons that attended 2 or more of the sessions. It's a 3-part series. And of course, if today is your first session, there is a final session in September. I have shared the registration link in the chat. And of course, if you attend all 3, you will get a gold star. And for persons, if you attend 2, you will get a silver star. And so that is the concept and the idea of the certificate of, of participation, just to show appreciation for your continued support and attendance in these sessions, and also for you to have something tangible that is proof that, you have gained some knowledge in that area. And so I know persons are asking for the recording and more details. We do have various platforms for the CCRAF. We have Facebook, we have LinkedIn, we have Twitter, where you can get updates on some of the sessions, future and some of the upcoming sessions, even some of the recordings for more easier access. And for persons who do not have social media, we have the recording, as I mentioned, will be uploaded via ICA's YouTube channel and will be shared with you. And for anybody, whether you have social media or not, you don't need any kind of login. We have a repository where we store all information of all past sessions with the recordings and everything that you can access. Probably while I have my screen on, I could show you quickly.
I recommend.
Just hold on 1 second, please. And so this is what the repository looks like. And so you could go to the English language for English speakers. And so once you go there, you will see that we have everything from since 2021. So if you require any information on any of the topics, you want to review them, you basically click there and you will see we have the recording, and then you could get more access to a lot more of these sessions. So you have the agenda, you have the presentation and everything available, as well as the recording that you can look at afterwards.